Alright, teams, we're back. Of course, we're talking FF7, we're talking Rebirth. We're here at the trailer breakdown for the theme song announcement trailer, or I've also seen it called just theme song trailer. With the last trailer we got with Summer Game Fest, I kept putting off the trailer breakdown for a few days because there was just so much information. But this time around, I just want to get right into the trailer breakdown. There is a blog post that came out yesterday kind of accompanying this trailer that we might look at throughout the video if we need to. So the trailer opens up with the line we've seen previously, "The world will be saved, but will you?" And we see a little bit more of Zack's final stand. But what's interesting is that we hear Zack say that he was feeling every single bullet.
Feeling every single bullet.
Obviously, this is like an insane way to open a trailer, right? We're seeing Zack like being fired upon. This obviously had the community talking a bit. The usual suspects are, talking about Zack's death, and this is showing him dying, etc., etc. I mean, you see a bullet fly at his head, right? There's a couple things wrong with that. For starters, like, we know that's not how Zack dies because we have Crisis Core Reunion, right? If we're following the continuity, that's not when and where Zack dies. For when the sun's out, he obviously dies in the rain and the storm and all that other shit, right? Ever when it's overcast. But also on the Japanese side of things with the trailer, it's implied that he's not actually being hit by the bullets, even though he says he felt them in the English trailer. Here we have a tweet from TurquoiseHammer, who we've used in the past before for translations, but they also do translations with Shinra Archaeology Department, who we always use on the channel. But they dropped this tweet earlier saying, contextually with the Japanese line, I'm pretty certain this is Zack recalling how bullets kept magically missing him. The next shot would probably be a whisper blowing it away. They also followed this up with a couple other tweets that say, in my opinion, that narrows it down to two possibilities. The whisper saves Zack in a last-ditch effort to stop Sephiroth, or Sephiroth saves Zack after gaining control of the Whispers. And they also further clarified kind of more direct translations, and they say, can change a bit depending on the context, but a few versions are, the wind sure was blowing, I guess that was quite a gust, come to think of it, it certainly was windy. So Zack talking about the wind in that moment would obviously be in regards to the Whispers, which were there, they're present when we get like the vision of Zack on the edge of the highway. But also, if you go back to something like the Yuffie DLC, whenever she tries to go into the Seventh Heaven bar, like she gets like blown away, essentially, right? They like a big gust of wind like pushes her back, essentially.
Weird.
So we know that the Whispers are like a gust of wind to people that can't see them. We know Yuffie can't see them in that moment, and Zack can't see them at the end of Remake or whatever. So that's like his interpretation, right? He just thinks it's like the wind or something along those lines. And it's been a popular theory for a long time that the Whispers would actually be protecting Zack, kind of contrary to what you think is happening. You go through Remake, that the Whispers are there trying to keep Destiny in line. So you'd think they'd be there to make sure that Zack dies, but in fact, they're trying to make sure that he lives. As for the idea of like Sephiroth being the one that like saves Zack, like that can work too. There's a theory out there of like him using Zack to help manipulate Cloud, obviously, because of their connection and all that other shit. I don't know how much I believe in that, but then at the same time, we don't see Zack saved until after defeating Whisper Harbinger. Obviously, the first scene we get Zack on the end of the highway, Sephiroth's not controlling the Whispers at that moment, but he is after Harbinger's defeated, so it's possible that he could have manipulated them to save Zack back at his final stand or something. I don't know. It's time travel shit. It's weird. It's obviously a lot to talk about right there in the first couple of seconds, but any sort of Zack scene is going to be like one of the most talked about things from any trailer, and like the Zack scene and a couple of the scenes throughout this trailer are really the biggest talking points. Let's continue. We then get a look at our boy Bugenhagen again, and we get like a very vague silhouette of Guy Natak. We're in obviously the Cave of Guy here, and we do see that it seems to be Barrett and Red 13, and presumably you'd also have Cloud for the actual boss fight. We then finally get the face reveal of Vincent, though we don't get to see the full face here, and we don't see his full face throughout the trailer, but there is character art out there for him. I'll throw it up on the screen for those of you that want to see Vincent's lips. We then move on to, again, another important scene that we got to talk about, where we're seeing Zack and Biggs talk, and he talks about how like their luck runs out, mine doesn't, and the moment gets a pass, and we see like a poster, whatever you want to call it, on the wall with like everybody from Avalanche crossed out except for him.
Supposed to do. Their luck runs out, but mine doesn't. I'm the only one who gets a pass.
First and foremost, the one poster that Biggs has where he's crossed out the members of Avalanche, it kind of contradicts with the Shinra one posters in that like we know that Shinra's actively pursuing our group. So I don't really know why Biggs would think that they're dead if he knows that like Shinra's like after them, right? Unless he thinks that they died during the Sector 7 collapse, like maybe he survived or whatever. So, and as far as he knows, everybody else died potentially. That could be what's going on here. I just want to point it out. Something else I want to throw out that I think's kind of an interesting concept is even though we haven't seen like Cloud on like a one poster yet, and maybe that's intentional, maybe Shinra doesn't want people to know they have like an ex-soldier or Shinra soldier in general gone rogue or whatever the fuck. I do wonder if Biggs is going to mention Cloud at all, because obviously he's going to be mourning the loss of his friends, but Cloud was one of them, right? He's a part of the bombing missions and shit. And it'd be kind of interesting to see what happens in that dynamic, right? Like him talking about the Cloud that he knows versus the Cloud that Zack, drug into Sector 5, because they're different people, sort of. But the meeting of Zack and Biggs has been long theorized, man. It's not something that I was on board with initially. It's something I didn't even think about for a long time, and then I had seen the theory, either on Reddit, on a video, whatever it was, that they might cross paths, and that seems to be happening here. Now, Whether or not it's different timelines, I'm still kind of a believer of that, but it's like, this seems to be the Biggs that, survived at the end of Remake, and he's mourning the loss of his friends. Now, it could also be this Biggs is mourning the loss of his friends that was on the news, right? The news footage that we've seen, we see those bodies. He could be talking about those people who are obviously very different from our group. Our group is very much alive, it seems, doing their own shit across the world. So I don't know. Going back to the Cloud conversation, though, really quickly, we're dealing with, multiple timelines here, potentially. So this could be a Biggs that survived Sector 7 Platefall, and it's, maybe in this timeline things played out almost exactly the same minus Cloud, right? We already had Avalanche doing the bombing missions and shit, and maybe they still ran into Red 13 and Aerith, and we're just seeing like the aftermath of all that, of what would happen if there was no Cloud with them. I think that makes a lot of sense. So it's possible that this Biggs doesn't even know Cloud at all, so we might not mention him. Actually, haven't said that. I think that's a really cool idea. I'm not entirely sure how much I believe it right now, but the idea that we're seeing like a different timeline, but it's one where, Cloud never joined up and inevitably leads to everybody dying. Like we never even get outside of Midgar. Maybe Aerith is with them because she gets captured like earlier because there was no Cloud bodyguard shit. We obviously had Reno going to the church when Cloud meets her. So like he's obviously going there to capture her. Maybe that's what happens. And like obviously they go to the Shinner building for whatever reason in this other timeline. And it just leads to her death because there's no Cloud there to save them. We then get gameplay of Cloud walking around various locations like Calm, a couple locations around Junon. We get the Gold Saucer, but also specifically like the Haunted Hotel, which is pretty cool. And then what has been confirmed to be the Desert Prison, which I initially thought was like North Corel. A couple things worth mentioning from the section, though. We do get to see Madam M in the Gold Saucer. I didn't see this with my reaction, but I caught it when like watching back through, and I almost put it in the post-discussion section of that video, but I decided to save it for today. But I'm wondering what she's here for. Is she going to give our boy Cloud another hand job? Speaking of Gold Saucer, we actually got a really good shot of the inside of it that's not a part of the trailer from the blog post, and I think this would be like an updated version of maybe like the lobby, or kind of combining what was like the lobby from the original FF7 with the entrance. And I say that because of the giant Moogle in the background that actually says "Welcome to Gold Saucer." And kind of in the background of this scene and some following scenes after this, we have Cloud and Tifa talking, and Cloud's actually acknowledging the fact that he has like a faulty memory, right? He talks about how he doesn't know things that he should, but he also knows things that he has no way of knowing.
Sometimes I don't even know who I am. I forget things everyone else remembers just fine, and know things I've got no right knowing.
Obviously, with dialogue like this, there's a lot of unknowns, right? We don't have context. We don't know when, where, and how it's being said exactly. But I do find it particularly interesting that Cloud's acknowledging his faulty memory, right? He's acknowledging that something's off, something's wrong there. And I've been saying for a long time on the channel that I think he's going to learn the truth in this game from some of the subtle shit they had in the first game with Remake, where, even like Professor Hojo straight up says, "Oh my, you're never in Soldier, my boy," or something along those lines, right? But then also the first trailer we got for Rebirth, like Cloud strip says Zack's name and all that other shit. So I feel like that's maybe kind of what this is. But again, we don't have context. It's kind of further add to this part of the discussion. In the background, Tifa's talking about how Cloud saved her before, now it's her turn to save him, which kind of alludes to like the live stream stuff, right? Where she kind of pieces his mind back together. So again, maybe something there.
It's okay. You saved me before. Now it's my turn.
Also in the background, we have what I believe are some new synergy attacks, and we'll read what the descriptions are on the blog post. So the first one is Cloud and Aerith, which is called Firework Blade, which is simply just Cloud uses Aerith's magic to unleash a ranged attack. And then for Kate Sith and Tifa, it's Moogle Dunk Shot. It says Tifa swings Kate Sith's Moogle around and launches it at an enemy. It then moves into the scene where we talk to one of the top guys down in the desert prison, Crow Prison, where we got to do a chocobo race to get out of there, who in the original game he was called Coates, but for whatever reason they renamed him in Rebirth to Solemn Gus. Ugh. His description reads, "The sleazy kingpin of Crow Prison, Gus is as flamboyant as he is smooth-talking. Add to that the healthy dose of showmanship, and it's little wonder that the dregs of the Dust Bowl have flocked to him." And the Dust Bowl is like a kind of a nickname for Crow Prison. I'm going to pause there just for a second because they've been like renaming a lot of shit in the remake project, and I just don't understand this one. Like, I don't give a shit about Coates. He's a fucking minor character. You see him once in the story. Never again. Who gives a shit? I don't know why they renamed him to like Solemn Gus. I don't know if Solemn's meant to be like a first name or like a nickname, or if Gus is meant to be his first name or whatever, but it's just like, why can't he just be called Coates? I don't know. It's weird to me. I do want to say, though, that I did find his dialogue kind of funny because he jokes about it being like Red 13 that's going to do the chocobo race, because to him that's a ridiculous concept probably, but obviously like hours before we even get to this part of the game, Red 13 is very much riding chocobos.
Is it you, or is it the pooch?
We then get a quick scene with Cloud and Dio, and it seems like they're going to face off in something. I don't entirely know what. I said in my reaction, I think it might be like a dance thing. I've seen other people mention that it might be like a squat mini game, which I think makes a bit of sense because obviously Dio's ripped as fuck and thinks he'd probably destroy Cloud in a squatting game. But I've also seen people mention maybe the battle square. My initial reaction of it maybe being like a dance battle thing, it's just because they're staring at each other and the lighting's very similar to like the dancing that Cloud does in the Honeybee Inn, at least when it first starts, kind of like the low lighting with spotlight on them. We also know that Dio likes to participate in all the mini games and shit around the Gold Saucer. We got that from the blog post. We know that Andre is there and dancing and shit like that. So that's what I initially went with. The whole Battle Square thing, I don't think that's it because there's like a crowd in the background and it's clear that they're like facing each other about to do something, some sort of competition. And so I think like a physical thing also makes sense. If it's not a dancing thing, which it may not be, I could see like a squatting minigame or something along those lines. We then finally get the reveal of our boy Sid Highwind, and he looks great. Pretty much everything about the scene is great, except there's a bit of controversy that we got to talk about that I kind of agree with. First and foremost, there is no smoking in the scene, right? We don't see a cigar, a cigarette, whatever he's going to be doing in this game. We just don't see that here, which is weird, because I feel like there should be some sort of smoking fucking utensil somewhere at all times when it comes to Sid. But also, kind of the main thing here, he's nice. A little too nice. He's just offering to help Aerith for some reason, and that's just not the Sid we know. At least not when we first meet him, right? When we first meet him, he's a complete asshole. That's just, for better or worse, that's his character, right? He obviously becomes a good guy as the game goes on, and then like the sequel shit, like Dirge of Cerberus and Having Children, he's just kind of a straight up good guy, right? But when we first meet Sid, he's a complete asshole. So the scene's a little weird. It's obviously out of context. We don't know exactly when it's happening, but it's somewhere around the Rocket Town segment, obviously, because the tiny Bronco's there in the background. We see the tiny Bronco later on fly off and shit. And just him like offering to help Aerith is just, it seems so out of character for this time of the story, if that makes any sense.
Is there anything I can do for you? I want to help.
With that scene in that dialogue, he's like practically begging to help Aerith. And it just feels so out of place for his character, especially for this point of the story. And a lot of people were worried that they would change Sid's character, for like a modern interpretation, for a modern audience, kind of censor him a little bit. And that's kind of the vibe you get from this, but again, it's kind of out of context. We don't need to jump to conclusions just yet, because it's our first time seeing him, our first line of dialogue from him. We don't know exactly how far into the story this is taking place in terms of when we meet him to that point of that dialogue, but still, it's a little bit worrying. We also have a brief character description on the blog post, which we definitely have to read, that says, this rogue pilot of reputable skill runs a shuttle service out of various abandoned airstrips. After Cloud and company flag him down, he flies them around the globe in his beloved Tiny Bronco. So this was really, really interesting because we've been told before that the time that the Tiny Bronco can fly is very brief, but obviously once its wings get damaged, you can still go around in the water, just like the original FF7. But now we have this description of Sid that says they use the Tiny Bronco to like fly us around the globe. So it seems like there's going to be almost like a fast travel system with Sid, with these like abandoned airstrips or whatever. Maybe like a Final Fantasy X sort of thing where hey, I want to go over here, and he just like fast travels you there kind of thing. It's kind of cool, man. So it might not get destroyed in the same way that it did in the original FF7, right, where we're trying to fly away from Rocket Town, and we have the Shinner guys like shooting at it, and it damages the wing. I'm kind of curious how it gets damaged now, if we can use it to fly around the world for a while. Kind of cool. We then get a look at a couple summons, Titan, Phoenix, and Bahamut, a Bahamut variant that I don't think is new. We'll talk about that in just a second. As for Titan, I'm not like the biggest fan of the way he looks. He still kind of resembles the Titan from the original FF7, but he has the kind of fucked up skin that like modern Titans have, like Final Fantasy 15 and Final Fantasy 16, and more so 16 in this case, but it's maybe them leaning into like his Earth element, so maybe the Earth element's going to be in this game, which could kind of explain like the cracks in his skin and stuff like that, but I just always kind of like the very human looking Titan from the original FF7. I don't know why. That's just me, though. Personal preference. Phoenix actually sounds pretty cool because we get kind of everything that you want and expect from Phoenix. It does still do damage, but it can also heal party members and revive party members, which is pretty damn cool. And grant like buffs and stuff like that, which we could obviously get buffs from like Carbuncle with Remake, but besides that, with like a lot of the other summons, I don't think you could really get buffs that I can think of or even heal like party members and shit. So seems like maybe Phoenix will be very unique. The blog post says, a bird possessed of exquisite beauty and wings of brilliant flame, Phoenix not only flies about the battlefield assailing foes with its blistering hot attacks, but also heals the party's wounds. In addition to engulfing enemies in flames with its wings of wildfire, Phoenix can grant buffs with healing effects. It can also revive incapacitated allies and fully recover their HP with a rise, allowing them to return to the front of the line and continue the fight. When it departs the field of battle, Phoenix unleashes Rebirth Flame, which recovers the party's HP and spells a fiery death to any foes within its wide range. A single feather falls from Phoenix's wings, enveloping the battlefield in burning flames, after which the bird rises from the cinders to deal the final blow. As for the third summon, it is called Bahamut Arisen, and as I mentioned with my reaction and kind of earlier in this video, that I don't think it's a new one, I think it's Neo Bahamut. And I think it's kind of confirmed by looking at the blog post, because they mentioned that its final attack is Giga Flare, which is what Neo Bahamut's attack was in FF7 original. We then finally get our first look at like the Dyne Barrett segment, which is great. As for like the scar on his face, I said in my reaction that I didn't recognize that, but I put a pinned comment on the reaction video. Looking back at like some old character art, it does appear like he does have scars. I just kind of never really noticed it. As for this scene here and the following Dyne scene that we get, obviously I love them overall. Like it's my favorite segment from FF7. I don't know how I feel about the Marlene stuff in terms of like for new players. Obviously we all know this shit from playing FF7. but you have like zero context of like where Marlene came from with the remake, right? Obviously, Barrett's a black man, so white little girl. Like, you can assume that he's not like biologically her father, but to like give that away in a trailer, man, like this is actually Marlene's dad. I just feel like it's such a big moment from the original FF7, and to just put that in a trailer, man, I'm just not a fan of it.
Look at me, Barrett. You think I want Marlene to see what her father's become?
Just a bit of speculation, but with this first scene and the later scene, like, Dyne's demeanor is very different. He's obviously seems pissed off right here, and later on he seems like very calm and chill. So I want to say that maybe this first scene might be before the fight between him and Barrett, and the other scene's after, but that's just a guess. We then, of course, get the scene of Zack and Marlene talking, where she talks about her, which we later learn to be Aerith, and that if she wakes up, some man's going to kill her.
Promise not to tell? When she wakes up, a scary man is gonna kill her.
And this scene is where things get quite spicy. There's lots to unpack from this. Later on, we do know that Aerith's there around this scene, around this time at some points. But in this particular scene right here, we do see Cloud in the background. And we talked about this with like previous trailer breakdowns. And in fact, this is a conversation that's been going back as far as like summer 2022 that I've talked about this on the channel of Zack probably taking Cloud to Elmira's. And we get confirmation of that here, obviously. Something pretty interesting about the scene, though, is that it gives us like a window of time, because we've always been kind of unsure of when the Zack shit is taking place. Like when we're seeing him like walk into Midgard, when we see him at the church, etc., etc. But the fact that he's interacting with Marlene while Marlene's at Elmira's tells us that it's at least post-Platefall. When exactly is it post-Platefall? That's hard to say, really. Also, this scene clears up the whole like skybox issue. If you guys remember that shit with the ending of like Intergrade/episode intermission when you see Zack at the church. Because during the scene where he's about to open the doors, you can see like over his shoulder, and in the distance, you don't see Sector 7 in the sky, right? You can see just the open sky right there. And a lot of people would argue, like, no, it's not post-Platefall. Zack died in the past, right? This is just a skybox issue. This game's shit or whatever. But now we have Zack interacting with Marlene at Elmira's, which only takes place after Platefall. As per usual, you know, even though this is an old conversation, we were right. Oh, God, I'm so tired of being right all the time. Since it has been a while since we talked about the ending, and we were apparently right on the Sector 7 missing post-Platefall, that whole thing makes you wonder about the ending sequence, how much of it is intentional, like the goddamn cross. Now I'm sticking to my guns a lot on that now. As for the scene itself, like in the room with like Marlene and Zack and Aerith on the bed, like it's probably the hardest one to talk about and break down, because there's just a lot of unknowns right now. Because if there's only one timeline, why is Aerith here? When is this taking place exactly? It's definitely post-Platefall, but why is Aerith in a room, like in a comatose state, right? The only time we've ever seen her in a comatose state at any point so far would be the newsfeed we got with like whatever the first trailer was, right? Where we see our group on the news like being willed away by Shinra or whatever. So that might confirm that they're not dead, that they're maybe just knocked out comatose or something, and maybe Zack goes and saves her from Shinra, like gets her body or whatever, brings her back to her house. I don't know. I don't want to jump too much into like theory crafting right now, because there's just a lot of unknowns here. But I do think like Zack, you know, saving Aerith or whatever kind of makes the most sense, because if Shinra had her comatose body, they wouldn't take her to Elmira's. They'd take her to the fucking Shinra building where they want her, right? So it makes sense that like maybe Zack could like save her or some shit. I don't know. Same time, it's also possible that Zack goes to Elmira's with Cloud and like her body's already there or something, right? And that could be why people at the church are mourning, because they know Aerith is unconscious, comatose, maybe being comatose for a while. I don't know, man. A lot of unknowns. We then move into the play segment of the Gold Saucers kind of story area, the theme song of Rebirth, which is No Promises to Keep, and I completely missed the reveal of Jessie in my reaction, just because like when it's going by quickly and she's wearing like a white outfit, I just thought it was like Aerith or something, but it's pretty clearly Jessie now. Now, this whole like segment of the trailer actually gives us a lot of like Cloud Aerith, which, you know, I've always said that it's Cloud Tifa ultimately in terms of relationships, but I've also said that like it's not like Cloud and Aerith can't have feelings for each other, and they give us some decent stuff here, but at the same time, everybody gets a date scene. Like we've already seen screenshots of like the Tifa, Barrett, and Yuffie one as well. In terms of who you're gonna get a date with, it's dependent on the game, right? There's player choice there. It's how you interact with like characters and stuff is going to decide your date scene. So none of them are technically canon, if that makes any sense. But they do give us some spicy shit with like Aerith and Cloud, where like Cloud and Aerith are like almost face to face, very similar to like Cloud and Tifa whenever they're rolling out of the train in like chapter 4 or 5, whatever that shit was. And then we also have this part where like Aerith puts her head on Cloud's shoulder in the trailer, which you know, there's that if you're a Clarith. At the same time, they also give us a little bit of the Zara stuff, the Zack Aerith ship, with something that happens a little bit later in the trailer, but the way that the trailer opens and the way the trailer closes too. We'll get to that soon. As for the Jessie thing, it is pretty cool, pretty interesting, but they do give us like a direct picture of Jessie on the blog post, and right below it talks about how VR brings the play to life like never before. So a lot of people are speculating that while it is Jessie, it might be like a VR depiction of Jessie from her time at the Gold Saucer, which I think makes a lot of sense. But there has been a theory out there for a while that we'd get to the Gold Saucer and see Jessie, but that was more so like the alternate change timeline stuff. But I'm assuming we're not at the Gold Saucer with Zack, right? We're there with our party. And our party, if it's tracking with the alternate timeline shit, they're not in the changed timelines. So would it make sense for Jessie to be there? So if it is Jessie in Cloud and everybody's timeline, kind of got to be VR. We get some more various scenes, like more of the play. We get to see our group talking to Vincent, the Cave of the Gi. We get a little bit of the Nibelheim flashback, which is kind of crazy. And you guys can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe this is our first actual look at the iconic scene of Sephiroth standing in the fire, right? We've had some other Nibelheim incident, like flashbacks and scenes and fire and burning and all that other stuff, but I don't think we've actually seen Sephiroth standing amongst the fire, right? So it's pretty cool. Well, I mean, as cool as it can be given the subject matter. We then get some more various scenes like the Cloud and Aerith date scene. We get some more of like Aerith singing on stage. We get the ladies all dancing together for something. I don't know exactly. We get to see Cid flying the tiny Bronco. And then we move into a scene we got to talk about. Of course, the scene in the trailer where Dyne gets to see a picture of Marlene, which is something we've talked about on the channel before. I don't know how long ago, but we talked about the possibility of Dyne not dying this time. Maybe getting to see Marlene, like at a distance, not necessarily trying to like be in her life, be her father or whatever, but maybe he goes to Midgar and just like sees her, just gets to see his baby girl or whatever. And that doesn't, I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but this time around he does get to see her. He gets to see what Marlene looks like after the last like however many years it's been. And it's something that I just didn't know how likely it was ever going to be. And I'm just so happy that it exists. Even if it's like a spoiler and all that shit in the trailer, like, man, what a good moment that's going to be to see like the whole thing actually with like dialogue and shit instead of music over it. I've watched the scene again like a lot of times for the video. It's also possible that this scene could be happening before the fight with Barrett, where maybe he shows Dyne the picture of Marlene and then he freaks out like, why would Marlene want to see what her father's become, and maybe they fight and maybe he dies afterwards. But I still think maybe it's post-fight. Either way, regardless of the context of the scenes, him getting to see Marlene, fantastic moment. We then get a brief scene of like Cloud and Tifa talking in the hallway of the Gold Saucer or something. Maybe it's near the play because you do see like posters and stuff on the wall, but I don't know. It then rolls into the reveal of Aerith laying in the bed, who Marlene was talking about earlier in the trailer. And this is happening around the same time because if you look like under like Zack, you can see Cloud's legs still in the background sitting in the chair. So being able to see Cloud's leg in that moment gives us confirmation that the earlier scene with Marlene and then the now scene with like Zack actually seeing Aerith laying there are happening around the same time. The context of the scenes, again, who knows exactly right now. We then get another kind of brief scene of Aerith singing, which we do have confirmation on Twitter of like the person who is like singing as Aerith. So that maybe does confirm that this is actually meant to be Aerith singing. So maybe canonically Aerith has always been able to sing, which is something I was asking in the reaction. And last but not least for the trailer, we do have them teasing Aerith's death scene where she's praying at the water altar. We do have whispers in the background, which is kind of interesting. And I've seen people point out too, like right before it cuts to black, you see the camera angle kind of panning up ever so slightly, which is of course teasing the moment that she dies. Which honestly, like people noticing that the camera angle pans up a little bit is kind of cool. It's a nice little attention to detail, but ultimately it doesn't matter because we know what's supposed to be happening in this moment, but also before the camera angle even pans up, we see two black feathers falling, which are obviously coming from Sephiroth, so we already know what's going on there. Now, is she actually dying? Like, Remake is almost 4 years old at this point. We've talked a lot about Aerith's fate over the last couple of years. It's a tired conversation. We've talked about it somewhat recently, too. I try not to say what I think's going to happen in terms of, like, her fate. I just think it's, like, I think it's possible she could live. They could go that route and her die at a later point, that kind of thing. Obviously, Square Enix loves to give spoilers in the trailers, but I just don't see why you would put that in the trailer and then what you think's going to happen happens, right? Like, we have the bullet flying at Zack, right? And on the English side of things, you're thinking that that's like him potentially dying or whatever, and maybe just not realizing at a later point or whatever the fuck. But we know because of the Japanese side of things that it seems like he's not going to die in that moment. The bullet's not going to actually hit him. And same thing here. You're seeing Aerith, they're teasing her fate, all that other shit, her going to die by the hands of Sephiroth. But that's just like the boring route. Even though it's what's supposed to happen because of FF7, everybody's expecting it, and you're giving it away in a trailer. So I just think things could be different. I just don't know what happens is different. Like, you don't even have to be a fan of OG FF7 to know what's going to happen in the moment, right? If you've just played Remake, you see the whispers at the end of the game with Sephiroth. You see the black feather all throughout the game because of Sephiroth. All it takes is just seeing those black feathers there to kind of put two and two together. Like, Sephiroth is above Aerith in this moment. It's like, what's going to happen? Him attack her. Like, come on. You don't have to be a fan of OG FF7 to piece that together. So the boring route is him killing her. Tease like some sort of big thing at the end of Rebirth, some sort of like cliffhanger sort of ending. What happens there? Who knows? Does Cloud block the attack, save Aerith this time, cut to black? Does Aerith fucking instant transmission dodge that shit and hit fucking Sephiroth with the Kamehameha? I don't know. Does Zack show up somehow if it's all in the same timeline? to either die instead of Aerith or saves Aerith in this moment or witnesses Aerith's death to make the scene that more impactful. There's a lot of things that could be happening, dude. And that's what's so fun about this. But dudes, that'll just about wrap up the video. Our trailer breakdowns are lengthy these days. We go super in-depth as much as we can for the most part. It's a 2.5 minute trailer that we turned into like a 25-minute video. That's just what we do on this channel, man. We like to talk about FF7. But it's been, my ass is sore. I've been sitting in this chair for at least like 7 hours. Like I think I started around like noon or so my time, and it's literally 6:56 p.m. right now. I've been doing this for a long ass time, and I just kind of want to wrap it up. As per usual, if I miss anything in the trailer, be sure and let me know. But also, are there any like sort of interviews or articles out there separate of like the Square Enix blog that we kind of looked at that I'll have linked in the description below? Is there anything else worth talking about? Because I do want to talk about some FF7 tomorrow if we can. Let me know in the comments, my dudes. Anyways, that's the video. Subscribe to the channel if you guys are new. Social networks in the description below. If I'm into -YT. That is it. Bye.
Used to care what people thought, but now I care more, and nobody out here's got it figured out. So therefore, I've lost all hope of a happy ending, depending on whether or not it's worth it. So insecure, no one's perfect. We spend it with no shame. We blow that like Coltrane. We in here like Rogaine, or leave it like Cobain.